What's up, I'm Ijemma and welcome back to my channel. When I first started learning JavaScript, I was taught that if-else statements were absolutely key to writing conditional logic. But as time has gone on, I've learned that there are other ways that you can write conditional logic, like with switch statements. And in the past year or so, I learned about another alternative called ternary operators, which is just a more simplified and concise way of writing conditional logic. So in this video, I'm going to be walking you through ternary operators. I'm going to explain what they are and how you would want to use them. Throughout this video, I'm going to be showing you helpful code block examples to show you how you can use ternary operators, and then on top of that, I'm also going to be showing you code blocks where we start using if-else statements, but then we ultimately switch over to ternary operators. And let's get started with this video. So let's take a look at the syntax of the ternary operator. The name hints at it, but the operator has three parts to it. There's the conditional argument or the conditional check before the question mark. This is where you'd want to say if something, you would want to put it before the question mark. After the question mark, the expression that will get executed will be returned if the condition is truthy. So if your condition results to be true, then we're going to execute expression if true. But if our conditional argument turns out to be falsy, where its final value is equivalent to false, then we're going to execute the second expression that's after the colon. So now that we have a high-level understanding of how ternary operators work, let's take a look at an if-else statement and see how we can later use a ternary operator to have the same functionality. So in this code block, I have a constant called isFriday where I set to true, and then I have a let variable called phrase. If isFriday is true, then we're going to set phrase to TGIF. If it's not Friday, then we're going to set phrase to regular day. So by the time we're done executing this code, phrase is going to be set to TGIF since isFriday is set to true. So now let's take a look at how we can use ternary operators instead. So again, I have my constant variable isFriday set to true, and then in this case, I have phrase equal to our ternary operator. So our conditional argument is Friday. We're checking to see if it's either true or false. If it's true, then we want to assign the value TGIF to phrase. If it's false, then we're going to assign the value regular day to phrase. So because our conditional argument is truthy, phrase will be assigned to the value TGIF. So one of the biggest and probably the most obvious benefits of using ternary operators is that you reduce the number of lines of code you have to write in your application for conditional logic. So if we go back to our if-else statement code block, we see that we're taking up 7 lines of code to assign a value to our phrase variable. But when we look at the code block for our ternary operator, we're only using 2 lines to assign a value to phrase. So we can see from these code block examples that ternary operators introduce a ton of benefits to our code. It can help reduce the number of lines of code that we have to write in our application, and on top of that, sometimes they're more readable than regular if-else statements. But it's important to note that even though ternary operators are a great alternative to writing conditional logic, they are kind of different from if-else statements. They're different in a way such that ternary operators are expressions while if-else statements are statements. The if-else construct is a statement, meaning that for the most part, it's responsible for executing code inside the if, else if, or else blocks, while ternary operators return expressions, which can be placed in locations where values are expected. So let's take a look at our previous code blocks to have a better understanding of what all of this means. So again, here we have our isFriday if-else statement. So here we see inside the if and else blocks, an action is being executed. Specifically, the action is the value assignment to the variable phrase. So the important thing to know about if-else statements is that they can't return a value that can be assigned to variables or passed in as arguments into methods. So let's take a look at our ternary operator example again. So here we can see that the ternary operator returns expressions or values that can be assigned to our phrase variable. So we can take a look at another example where I have a method called saying of the day, which expects to take in a string. But instead of just directly putting in a string as the first parameter, I put in a ternary operator that checks to see if today is Friday. If it is Friday, then I pass in the string if be Friday, else I'll say it's not Friday. So because ternary operators return expressions, that gives us more flexibility where we can put conditional logic when we're assigning values to variables or passing values into methods. I'm going to show you a couple of extra examples where we can use ternary operators. So in this code block, I have a constant called names. Right below that, I have another variable called new name, which is equal to Donald Glover. Right below that, I have another variable called updated names, which spreads the value of names, and then right after that has a ternary operator. In this ternary operator, my conditional argument is checking to see if my new name, which is Donald Glover, length is greater than 10. If it is greater than 10, then I'm going to pass in new name and add it to my updated names array. If it's not greater than 10, I'll pass in null. So my final updated names array is going to be Michael B. Jordan, Viola Davis, and Donald Glover. But let's say that our conditional argument turned out to be falsy. What happens then? So if we go back into the code block and instead check to see if the new name length is less than 10, we're going to see that our final array is going to be equal to Michael B. Jordan, Viola Davis, and then null. So it's always important to remember that ternary operators are going to return a value either from the truthy expression or from the falsy expression. Let's take a look at how ternary operators can work inside of objects. So here I have my name variable, which is again assigned to Donald Glover, and then I have my person object. Inside the object, I have my name key, which is assigned to the outer name variable. And then right below that, I have a isLongName key, which is again assigned to the expression returned from the ternary operator. Here I'm checking to see if my name's length is greater than 20, meaning that it's a pretty long name. If it's a long name, it's going to be set to true. If it's not, false. So we can see in our final person object that isLongName is set to false. I think single line ternary operators are really simple, straightforward, and easy to read. But I think what happens a lot of the time is when people are first exposed to the operator, they're looking at a maybe intermediate to advanced use of the operator. More specifically, they're probably looking at an example where chaining is happening. The ternary operator is as flexible as if-else statements, such that you can chain conditional logic together in one block. So let's take a look at a high-level example that's provided by MDN. So we have the first condition that if it's truthy, will return value 1. If condition 1 is actually falsy, then we'll move on to the second conditional. And then we check again to see if it's truthy or falsy. If it's truthy, we return value 2. If it's falsy, then we're going to move on to condition 3. I'm going to move down the chain until we either hit a truthy conditional argument or if we're at the bottom of our chain. So this logic is pretty similar to this logic, but with if-else statements. First, we check to see if condition 1 is true. If it's true, then we execute the first block of code. If it's not, then we move down to the next else-if statement, and we repeat the process until we meet the end of our chain, or if we hit a truthy conditional argument. Personally, whenever I have to chain conditional logic, I always opt to use if-else statements or even switch statements before ternary operators. Ternary operators just get so much more complex and harder to read as it gets more complicated. So one major point that I want you to take away from this video is that you really have to understand when you should be using ternary operators. If it makes a lot of sense to use a single line where you can have conditional logic that will assign a value to a variable, I always recommend using ternary operators. But if you're dealing with highly chainable logic, maybe you might want to look at if-else statements or even switch statements. If you're still not completely sure when you should be using ternary operators over if-else statements, I can give you some helpful examples. So here I have a pretty basic method that takes in an argument, and then I use the ternary operator to determine if the argument that I passed in is truthy or falsy. Once I determine if it's truthy or falsy, I can just instantly return a value out from that method. Another really common case is using ternary operators to conditionally render React components. So here you can see at this code block that inside of my render function, I have a condition where it's going to render the first component if the condition is truthy, or the second component if the condition is falsy. So the ternary operator enables developers to make the process of assigning values to variables more conditional. So the next time you come across possibly using an if-else statement, you should ask yourself if your code would benefit from you using a ternary operator instead. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any questions about ternary operators or if you have a video topic that you want me to cover in the near future. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'm also on Twitter where I talk about a variety of different topics. You can go follow me, send me a DM, and we can chat. And with that, I'll see y'all in the next one.